im Dezember vom 1. bis zum 24. ein großes Giveaway mit dem Marc Gebauer Highlight-Kanal. Kann man jeden Tag einen Teil gewinnen. Also wir haben Parfums, wir haben die Espresso-Tassen und dazu müsst ihr einfach auf den Marc Gebauer Highlight-Kanal gehen, ihn abonnieren. Das wäre sehr wichtig, damit ihr auch kein Video verpasst und sehr aufmerksam die Videos gucken. Denn in jedem Video ist eine Frage. Und zwar geht es um Talking Watches mit Josh Bernstein. Und zwar hier zeigt jemand seine Uhrenkollektion. Und ich muss sagen, er hat eine sehr, sehr schöne, historisch gewachsene Kollektion. Das sehe ich direkt. Wir haben jetzt hier nur mal einen kurzen Überblick zu geben. Eigentlich das, was auch jeder Sammler so durchläuft. Wir haben ein paar günstigere Uhren, so eine Breitling und so weiter. Und ich denke, dass ihr sehr viele Sachen sehen werdet, mit denen ihr euch auch assoziieren, also mit denen ihr euch identifizieren könnt. Daher, wir gucken jetzt mal dieses spannende, sehr cleane, ohne Wörter Video. Mein Gott, ey.
After we were done filming, I went to one of the vendors and I was trying to negotiate on some tchotchke, you know, like beads or something. Sure. And the salesperson looks down, he looks at me, he's like, really, you're trying to negotiate? I was like, yeah. He's like, you're wearing a double red Sea Dweller and you're trying to negotiate.
Sometimes the watch can kill the deal.
Well, I was impressed that he could spot it. I was like,
sehr, sehr wichtig auf jeden Fall.
That one I know.
Welche Uhr man zum Besuch beim Uhrenhändler trägt. Sehr, sehr wichtig.
Josh Bernstein, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Talking Watches.
My pleasure.
You've been described as an archaeologist, a TV show host, an educator,
Ein Archäologe. Interessant.
survival expert. I was wondering if you could kind of just tell me about the arc of your career and see how you see yourself.
Nein, guck mal, Leute, ich meine es gar nicht böse. Jeder kann sich ausdrucken, wie er möchte. So, weiß ich, das sei jetzt mal dahergestellt. Alles super. Also nur halt jetzt, das ist alles gut, ne? Aber ihr versteht es, glaube ich.
I would say I identify as an explorer, an educator, a storyteller. Those are the top 3 words I pick. I've been fortunate to have done a lot of travels as part of my work in television. I get the fun job of being...
War damals übrigens auch einer meiner Kinderwünsche als Beruf, weil ich sehr viel Jurassic Park immer geguckt habe und davon Fan war, wollte ich auch Archäologe werden.
The person that's put into places that audience would want to watch and tune in to see what happens next.
Hi, I'm Josh Bernstein. You're watching
Oh,
For the Truth
das ist
on the
es.
History Channel.
Oh. Guck mal, dasselbe mache ich eigentlich mit Uhren. Das wäre genau mein Ding.
And so this very interesting career path has taken you all over the world, and a lot of the times with watches. And it looks like you started really well. If we're following
Tolle Kollektion.
the chronological order, we have this beautiful Cartier tank.
That was a gift from my parents when I
Schöne Uhr, ist sogar, glaube ich, nur vergoldet.
graduated from college. And to be honest, it's a beautiful watch. You know, it's sort of the
Gibt's auch sehr günstig. Ich glaube, die kostet so 2.000 Euro, 2.500 Euro.
classic gentleman's formal wear piece.
Oh, guck mal hier. Was haben wir hier? Genau, ist beschichtet, ist Sterling Silber. Lustig, ne?
It was my entree into fine timepieces.
Cool.
So I'm grateful to my parents for introducing me to more than just the
Ja, ja,
Casios or
Anzuguhr.
Seikos that I was wearing at the time. But I will be honest,
Tolle Uhr, guck mal. Gebläute Zeiger, finde ich so eine schöne Uhr. Klar, viel zu klein, niemand von euch wird die kaufen. Ich finde die Uhr schön.
it doesn't get as much use as the other
Schön.
ones because
Schöne
these
Uhr.
are sportier and more compatible with my lifestyle. And then as I got into television in my 30s and started getting placed into very, say, risky situations, I realized that it might make sense to have the emergency. Production is going really off the rails if you have to pull the cord on that. But just knowing that I had that beacon gave me some peace of mind.
I mean, the Breitling Emergency is one of the rare places, I will say, where this hardcore gear and
Also bei der Uhr kann man halt ein Notsignal senden. Wenn man hier dran dreht und das rauszieht, da drin ist eine etwas längere Antenne und wenn der Satellit drüber fliegt, bekommt er quasi ein Notsignal, egal wo man ist auf der Welt. Davon gibt es auch Updates, die nochmal stärkere Signale senden. Spannende Uhr.
a high-end Swiss watch brand really intersect in such a meaningful way. And so just seeing one here in person is so cool. I have to know, was there ever a point in the course of filming an episode or being out on an expedition where you really thought...
Welchen Einfluss hatte die Uhr, die man zum Uhrenhändlerbesuch trägt? Schanik, ja, es hat natürlich schon was damit zu tun, also inwieweit du ernst genommen wirst. Ne? Also es kommt immer drauf an, beispielsweise, es gibt ja viele Leute, die Uhren einkaufen bei Konzessionären und dann, sagen wir mal, weiterverkaufen. Und da beispielsweise kann ich schon sagen, dass das Feedback bei dem Thema Richard Mille immer schon sagt, da haben die Leute sich schon sehr begeistert für, weil sie sowas auch sehr selten sehen. Ne? Wenn man eine sehr teure Uhr trägt, dann wissen die natürlich direkt, was los ist. Ne? Das muss man immer bedenken. So, von daher, es gibt verschiedene Ansätze. Zum Beispiel, wenn du mit einer Patek 3710 irgendwo reinläufst, wissen die, dass du jetzt nicht erst seit gestern mit dem Thema Uhren zu tun hast. Wenn du eine sehr teure Uhr trägst, also da kann man viel.
Geez, I might have to use this thing.
There were certainly plenty of conversations with the crew because they all knew that I had it.
Yep.
And they would make jokes that like, we're gonna, pull the cord on it while you're sleeping. But I was like, guys, first of all, it's like $10,000 if you do that, which I wasn't willing to pay for. There were some tight moments. There was one in particular in the Alps when I was doing a show for History Channel.
Wow.
It came close,
Das
but
wär
nothing, thank
mein
God.
Traum.
Right. Thank God, so far.
That's good to know.
Sowas ist genau mein Ding.
And then this one was another Breitling that was my stepfather's. And he wore this watch. He passed away a few years ago. I was having a seance, a medium-driven evening with a bunch of people here in New York. I was a guest, but this woman said, "Is there someone in the room who blah, blah, blah?" And I was like, yeah, that'd be me. She's like, "I'm getting a George." And I was like, wait, that's my stepfather. He just passed away. He's telling me that he wants to know where his watch is. And so I said, I'm pretty sure my mom has it. And he wants you to wear it. He wants you to wear it right now because he wants to be connected to your pulse.
Oh, wow.
And so I said to my mom, I'm like, that Breitling that George had, could I possibly have it? And so I wear that when I want a little bit of energy from my stepfather.
And so in the course of
Beim Bewerbungsgespräch ist es schwierig, also kommt immer drauf an, kann man nicht universell sagen. Bewerbungsgespräch ist ein bisschen in Deutschland ein bisschen schwierig.
Wearing these watches, we'll say mainly the Rolex watches, you've gravitated toward, brand new watches, which you've bought at retail. And then you've also purchased vintage watches at auction.
Yeah.
What appeals to you about, the modern watch and what appeals to you about the vintage watch?
The provenance of vintage watches, if there's one that's like special. I love that this piece, because it does rest on your wrist and does connect, as I said, to your pulse, there is a certain intimacy with the timepiece.
Lohnt es sich, eine teure Uhr beim Konzessionär anzuziehen? Ja, auf jeden Fall.
I don't have my watches engraved with anything about me on them, but I know other people do. And I kind of love connecting to that.
Yeah.
This is why I wear my stepfather's watch, because it allows me to connect with him. And you don't get that with new pieces. But at the same time, if you go to Baselworld and you're like, there's some amazing watches where people can sort of reinvent the timepiece. And so I'm conflicted, or I guess I take both paths at the same time. Vintage is where my heart lies for the history of the piece, and then modern watches for the sort of innovation of them.
And so following, your Cartier and a couple of Breitlings and then a Panerai, which you wore a lot on TV, now we get into some Rolex.
So my dad wore a Rolex. I think it was a day-date, but it was something that I was like, it's a lot of flash.
Yeah.
And so that was always my hesitation. I wasn't into bling. I was more into I have a mission.
Schaust du bei jeder Uhr auf den wirtschaftlichen Aspekt bezüglich Wertstabilität oder kaufst du auch Uhren, die völlig schlecht performen, aber die du richtig gut findest? Ja, dafür kann ich dir ein Beispiel geben. Und zwar, also wenn wir uns mal jetzt, ich finde die Uhr hier wunderschön, darum habe ich sie auch gekauft. Oder hier die grüne, finde ich auch wunderschön. Ich weiß, ich habe es irgendwie mit grün, aber irgendwie verkaufe ich sie nicht. Also ich schaue schon darauf, sage ich mal, für den Shop kommerziell schnell verwertbare Modelle zu kaufen, aber für mich persönlich ist da jetzt kein großer Fokus drauf. Ne? Also alle Uhren, die ich jetzt so eigentlich anbiete, abgesehen von ein paar, sind eigentlich schon immer mit Wertzuwachs verbunden und da gekoppelt, aber ja, für mich selber, ich sage immer, dass ich eine Jägerle Cultre Reverso haben möchte. Ne?
I want to wear a watch, this serves the purpose. But then in my relationship with the Explorers Club, which I'm a fellow and been a proud member of since 2004, I ended up meeting a number of people at Rolex, including Alan Brill. And as president of Rolex Watch USA, he was curious. I mean, we had a very good relationship, mostly because we would sit together at dinners for the Explorers Club, and he'd be like, Josh, what's with the Panerai? Or Josh, what's with the Breitling? And why aren't you wearing a Rolex? And I was like, well, my dad wore Rolex, but I don't really have a sense of the brand. And Alan was kind enough to invite me into the headquarters here in New York and gave me a tour. of the building. And at that point, I had a deeper affection for the degree of expertise and specialization that Rolex has, the machining every single part, and meeting people who'd been there 20, 30 years and were like so proud of their, I was like, okay, Alan, like, let's talk. And so I discussed with him, like, what's an appropriate first, as he put it, first Rolex, ever the salesman. And it came down to a GMT and a Sea Dweller. And I've always loved the sort of bare bones, no Cyclops lens style of the Sea Dweller. And so that was my first Rolex.
Auch finde
cool
ich sensationelle Uhr.
watch.
Sea Dweller, ich glaube, ich habe auch ein paar. Sehr, sehr nice Uhr.
It's really a perfect entree into the world of Rolex sports watches.
Yeah, and as a diver, it was perfect for me. The helium escape valve is a little bit beyond. I'm a fairly proficient diver, and so I get into some mixed gases. But at that point, I was like, I just love the style of it.
Sehr coole Uhr.
And then after the Sea Dweller, this is where you really start to kind of take off as a Rolex collector.
Kannst du Stockholm Watches, du meinst Luxury Watches of Stockholm? Ja klar, in München. Anhiel, mein Freund.
I remember I was in Utah at a trade show for the outdoors. And there was a Rolex dealer there, and so I went in and I was just curious what they had. And he had this watch, which was at that point the 50th anniversary Submariner.
The Kermit.
The Kermit, yeah, the Kermit. And I love green. It's always been one of my favorite colors. And I remember thinking, like, as much as I love Submariners, this is a special moment in Submariner history. So I reached out to Alan. I was like, hey, there's this 50th anniversary edition. And he's like, those are hard to get. Like, even for us, that's hard to get. Just buy it. So I bought it.
I mean, the Kermit is a total classic. This is a watch that people are still kind of vying for in the collecting community. They absolutely love the Kermit.
So that was number 2, and the floodgates were open. At that point, then, I think number 3 was this, the white-faced stainless Daytona, which, again, collectible.
This is the original hot steel sports watch for Rolex.
And I remember I was at Fortain Jewelers in Carmel, and Josh Bonifest there. He had this for me, thankfully, but he was like, this is not even something that most people can walk in and get. I wear this these days mostly for very elegant affairs. It's not my daily wear, but I love it every time. It has such a distinct look. And I've actually closed business deals with people because they're wearing either the Daytona or the Sea Dweller.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll be like, again, you look at their shoes, but if they're wearing a Rolex that says something, and if they're wearing this, Daytona or a Sea Dweller, I'm like, okay, we have a similar
some
aesthetic.
Kind of simpatico or something.
Yeah, some sort of simpatico, exactly. And then the watch after this, which I have since sold but acquired at auction, was my most collectible watch, and that was a double red Sea Dweller.
Oh, wow.
1973 with original papers, Mark II. And that one, that was like an investment, that was a big leap for me. And I wore it for a number of years. I actually had Rolex service it. It pressure tested, and they were amazed that I was wearing it on my explorations.
Krass,
ja,
schöne Geschichte.
You're diving with this? And I was like, yeah, it's made for diving. They're like, this is a vintage collectible that there is no other crystal for it.
Hey Marc, spielt der EC noch eine wichtige Rolle beim Kauf? Habe einen Batman Jubiläband mit LC666. Nee, also bei mir nicht. Bei mir spielt es keine Rolle.
Like, this crystal's pressure tested, but if it breaks,
gibt Leute, die darauf Wert legen,
there isn't
aber
one in the
die sind
system.
mir extrem
So you lost the watch at that point. So I
Right.
sent a picture while I was diving at like 130 feet, saying
gosh.
here it is, and everyone at Rolex was like, what are you, but the spirit of the watch is exploration, is diving. So I was adamant about using it in the field as much as I could until at one point I was doing a show in Ephesus in Turkey. After we were done filming, I went to one of the vendors. They sell like these little kiosks. And I was trying to negotiate on some tchotchke, like beads or something.
Sure.
And the salesperson looks down and he looks at me, he's like, really, you're trying to negotiate? I was like, yeah. He's like, you're wearing a double red Sea Dweller and you're trying to negotiate.
Sometimes the watch can kill the deal.
Well, I was impressed that he could spot it. I was like, you know your watches? He's like, that one I know. I was like, mental note, don't wear this when you're trying to negotiate, because it was like having a small car on your wrist in terms of its value.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved that watch, and then I sold it to another collector at the right time.
What makes this really strange is that the access point
Neapel.
to this underground labyrinth is in the back of a store that sells vegetables and fruit. It's just an average store. There's nothing special about it, and yet it's got a staircase that goes underground.
In all of the television that you've made,
are
there any explorations or excavations or any episodes that you would like to revisit where you think that you could continue digging and learn more about certain discoveries?
Yes, oddly, that's come up recently. So when I was making shows for History and Discovery, we were in a different era of TV, and the pendulum swung into a reality phase, and the pendulum seems to be swinging back. There's a few places I'd like to go. I've been fortunate to have gone
Sehr,
to
sehr
about 80
spannender Typ.
countries at this point. But that leaves about 140, depending on your counting, left to do. And so it's a combination of going to new places and then going back to old places with new eyes. What's interesting is that the pursuit of exploration, right? Like how we go about bringing new knowledge into the world, especially in the scientific community, began, I think, initially with astronomy and then geography and the ability to go to the ends of the earth and map them. And you can't do
Steve
that
Irwin,
without a
sehr
very
krasser
strong
Typ, ja.
understanding of where you are on the planet and what time it is. Right? It's meaningless if you just go there and don't know how long it took you. You can't do any kind of mapping. So the timepiece becomes a critical tool for explorers. And the ability to have greater accuracy and to have a clamshell that's waterproof. I mean, the ability to say this is not going to ruin your expedition because it'll survive even if you don't.
Yep.
And then the stories of timepieces that happen, like Colonel Percy Fawcett and his, like, the only thing that survived from him was his timepiece. And so you have these wonderful stories of explorers and their timepieces that sort of transcends the practical equipment list. It's like,
Cool.
This is part of me and it's going to contribute to my success.
Schöne Sammlung. Ist nicht die teuerste Sammlung, aber finde ich eine sehr, sehr interessante Folge.